I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week I had the privilege of visiting with an endocrinologist from my district, Dr. Michael Laidlaw. He's witnessed the medical dangers of this obsession with new transgender ideology, and specifically how dangerously it's being pushed on children as young as 8 years old, which will only be made worse by this legislation when parents are threatened with lawsuits or the loss of their children for questioning their child's gender dysphoria or objecting to life-altering therapies or surgeries. And I'd like to submit 3 items for the record. First, a letter he wrote outlining what he's seen and his concerns for how H.R. 5 will elevate children's feelings about their gender over biological and medical reality. Second, a piece he wrote in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, calling for more skepticism among physicians who treat young people claiming gender dysphoria in light of the highly detrimental health consequences of gender affirmative therapy, such as increased ovarian cancer, lower bone density, and thrombosis and pulmonary embolisms. And third, an excerpt from an NIH report indicating that NIH has lowered the minimum age for inclusion in their studies about gender transition hormones from 13 to 8 years old, which I find truly disturbing. I'd like unanimous consent to enter those into the record.
Without objection.
I'm hopeful that these documents, along with all of the other questions raised by my colleagues today, will give pause to those who are championing the embrace of this radical trans ideology over biological reality. Ms. Beck, am I safe to assume that we should all agree that gender-based stereotypes about how men and women should speak or act or dress or appear should not be the basis of our interactions as a society?
I would only agree if you use the word gender as a synonym for sex. I don't agree with...
I mean, how somebody chooses to act, to dress, to talk, really should not be an object of notice by their government, should it?
I mean, these are all personal traits that are subject to change any day, any hour. I mean, my hair grows, you know?
Exactly, and we shouldn't assume that these stereotypes, we shouldn't use these stereotypes to craft statutory or legal definitions on discrimination.
I agree. Like I said earlier, there's no way to tell if someone's lying about being transgender. So if a man who wears a dress is considered as a woman by federal law, he could be lying, and there's no way for us to tell. Well,
that's the question I want to get at. H.R. 5 gives us a definition of gender identity that's based on stereotypes. Let me read from the text of the bill. It says, the term gender identity means the gender-related identity, appearance, mannerisms, or other gender-related characteristics of an individual. The drafters of this bill could have saved themselves some legalese and just said gender identity means gender stereotypes. What does that say about this movement that the lawyers drafting this bill are unable to define gender identity without relying on stereotypes?
It says not much because they haven't written much, unfortunately. I find it really disheartening that we're debating a federal law that is just incomplete and baseless. We've given a lot of testimony to show how this would affect women negatively, and that's just we were told to let it go. This would eliminate women and girls as a coherent legal category worthy of civil rights protection.
Well, let me ask you this. I would assume that you would support the numerous efforts by the government over the last several decades to promote women-owned businesses, for example, by giving women-owned businesses preference when competing for government contracts?
Sure, yeah. I think that's all great on the basis of sex.
Well, what should we tell a woman-owned business that loses out to a government contract because a man decided to identify as a woman in order to win that contract?
That should never happen.
Ms. Tandy, doesn't that happen under this bill?
Use your mic.
Yeah, what would you say?
Transgender women are women. And so I find this sort of language about calling transgender women by some other name to be not in line with...
Well, whatever language you would choose, the question remains, what would you tell a woman-owned business that lost a contract because a man decided to identify as a woman in order to win that contract?
Okay, if it was a transgender woman, I would say, you lost out, another woman won. It was probably a better application.
so let me ask you
Let
this.
me finish. If it was a man who is trying to be fraudulent, I would do an investigation on fraud.
Yeah, but how are you going to know if he's trying to be fraudulent? No, because the time is mine. I'm out.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I ask the witness be permitted to finish your answer to that last
Well,
question?
if I can have a follow-up question.
No, your time has expired, but the witness gets to answer the question.
I'll let,
Question.
excuse me a sec. Let the witness answer the question, and I'll grant the gentleman an additional question.
Thank you. I mean, this question of people being able to lie about their gender identity, I find so interesting, because I think someone raised today, people can lie about being gay. People can lie about being a lesbian, and yet we need rights because we're gay or lesbian. The same rights apply. These are not things that people lie about to gain rights. These are things that are the basis of really painful discrimination, as we've heard from so many of us. And so to go ahead and mispronoun and misname people based on their true identity and these questions are coming at me in a way that don't make sense. If it's a man who's pretending to be a woman, then that's fraud. If it's a transgender person, then it's a woman.
But under your criteria, the only way to decide if the person is lying is to read their mind, which is beyond our abilities. And I want to ask you, what if every government contractor in America decided to identify as a woman? What mechanism is there for the government to verify that all of these men who do government contracting are identifying with women for genuine gender transition, as compared to trying to game the system? You can't tell unless you can read their minds, and I doubt you can.
The time of the gentleman has expired.